Greetings. I hope that you are thriving and doing really well and practicing radical self-care. I hope that you're waking up in the morning and the first thing you're doing is putting on a guided meditation for a happy day, a productive day, an energetic day. I hope that if you have a spiritual community, you're practicing prayer and you are connecting with other people in your spiritual community. It's very important that you do self-care. I know the tendency when you get out of a relationship with somebody who is a narcissist or toxic person is to want to focus on them and figure out what their deal is and why they did what they did and all of that. But it is so crucial that you actually focus on your own self-care, eating healthy foods, drinking plenty of water, getting exercise, not isolating. And I know this is very difficult, especially during COVID, but there are some support groups that you can go to. If you identify with some of the characteristics of, say, codependence, you can go to Codependence Anonymous. A lot of their meetings are on Zoom. You can also go to ACOA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. Most of the people in this community grew up with some sort of either psychological, emotional, verbal, or physical abuse in their families of origin. They tend to have attachment trauma, and we tend to have a proclivity for sort of codependent behaviors. So if you're having any of these issues, I definitely think it's a good idea to do 12-step recovery. Also, if you can get a trauma coach or a narcissistic abuse coach, as well as a trauma therapist. EMDR is very helpful. There's a lot of different types of therapy that are very helpful to help you heal from this trauma. So what I'm going to talk about today is, and if you want private coaching, go to www.coachcat.org. What I coach my clients on is we really try to look at the codependent behaviors and to sort of put those in remission and to learn some healthy boundaries and to sort of learn how to narc-proof your life. And that's actually what this video is about, how to narcissist-proof your life. What I'm going to talk about is how to take your power back and create boundaries in relationships. So what is narcissism? Well, you guys probably have a pretty good idea, but I'll just go over it briefly. They have a pathological self-centeredness. They have an unconscious deficit in their own self-esteem and very low empathy. So remember that, what I just said, an unconscious deficit in their self-esteem, right? So they have a lot of self-loathing, but it's unconscious. It's buried, right? And they have little to no empathy. They tend to exploit others. They constantly need supply, outside validation to feed their fragile egos. They feel they're very entitled and they feel superior, smarter, better than others. Of course, if they are the covert narcissist, they are not going to appear this way. They may appear humble, shy, introverted, kind, altruistic, self-depreciating. They actually have false humility. They're not really humble, but that's how they come across. So these are the most sort of dreadful because you cannot see them coming. They are very, very sneaky and duplicitous, but they think just like overt narcissists. They just know that if they show that to the world, they are not going to get what they want. So in some ways, they're even much more cunning than overt narcissists. But let's talk about if you have to have a narcissist in your life, whether you're co-parenting with them or you're working with them, here are some of the ways that you can sort of interact with them in a healthy way for you, or as healthy as is possible. So be very careful about sharing any personal information with somebody who you suspect might be a narcissist. In a way, you almost want to act very professional, and then what's called gray rock, which is very sort of bland and boring. You want to be very uninteresting for the narcissist. Do not show any emotions, and do not provide them with any information about your internal life, your feelings, or what you value, or what you're proud of, or what your goals are. Any information that you give to a narcissist in this regard will be used against you later. And if they're the covert narcissist, they may make you feel like it's so safe to share these things, right? Like they are so understanding and kind and they're listening and they really care. That is a mask, right? And then they are going to use that information later to hurt you, do a smear campaign, whatever. They're going to use it to hurt you. So very careful. If you think that you might be dealing with a narcissist, be very guarded about the information that you are willing to share. Be very careful. And then two, really important, educate yourself. Speak with the therapist about the symptoms that you've observed. Educate yourself. Learn all you can about narcissism. Remember, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how kind you are, how beautiful, how giving, how loving. It will never be enough for them. It's never going to stop them from cheating, lying, gaslighting, manipulating. They do that because they do that. It doesn't matter how amazing you are never going to change them, and they're not going to change for you. They're incapable. They are insatiable, right? So they're always discontent, and they're never going to be happy with anyone. You can never be perfect enough for these people, and they're going to treat people like this throughout their whole lives. They're going to operate with the three phases of the relationship with the narcissist: the idealization, the devaluation, and the discard. They're going to operate like that in every single relationship they ever have in the future. They did it in the past. They're doing it in the present. This is just how they operate. So it's very, very important that you know what you're dealing with, that you know what type of narcissist you're dealing with, and that you understand that the person that you think is a narcissist, be able to identify the characteristics and the symptoms so that you're aware of what you're dealing with. And remember, so the coverts can be tricky because they're wolves in sheep's clothing. They can even appear to possess a higher level of integrity than most people. They can have the halo effect. These are the really sneaky ones. Overts are a little bit easier to identify because they are usually overt about their feelings. They tell you they're superior to you. They tell you that nobody can match up to them. They're in a way they're more honest than coverts because they're so sort of blunt about how they feel, right? Coverts will act like they're very self-depreciating, and internally they think that they're superior and better than everyone, right? They're the smartest person in the room, very smug, condescending, and really they have a lot of contempt for other people, but that's because they have unconscious contempt for themselves, right? And that spills out in all their interactions. So really important if you're dealing with a narcissist to learn very healthy boundaries. And if early on in the relationship, if you set those boundaries and they're violated early on, then that is a red flag and you can exit that relationship. You actually don't have to be friends or lovers with anyone you don't want to be. You're people pleasing or need to be liked. You do not need to be liked by everyone or loved by everyone. In fact, if you're sending your true, authentic self, some people are not going to like you. And guess what? That is a compliment. That's awesome. If you're sending your real self to relationships, your true self, some people aren't going to dig it. And that's great. That means you're sending your true, authentic self. So good for you. But with a narcissist, even if you don't know if it's a narcissist, when you're dating somebody early on, it's so important to take it very, very, very slow. That slow as molasses. Do not be texting them every day, calling them, or allowing them to text or call you. Do not allow them to bum rush you. If you're seeing that, that's some red flags. Try saying no with somebody that you suspect might be a narcissist and watch how they react. Some red flags to look for early on in a relationship with a narcissist, either dating or friendship, is does this person's actions match their words? Are they love bombing? Is there a lot of flattery? Are they trying to rush physical intimacy if in a romantic context? Are they putting you on a pedestal? Are they saying you are incredible, amazing, and so smart when they actually don't even know you very well? Are they saying that they love you, in the first 2-3 weeks of knowing them, when again, they don't really know you? Hey, it takes a long time to get to know a person, right? So anyone who's telling you that you're like the love of their life and their soulmate and they just met you like 3 weeks earlier, that is a huge red flag. Watch for that. And that can go for friendships too. If somebody is like they're your bestie right away and they're super intimate and like they just want to spend every waking moment with you, even as a friend, that is a red flag. Now when people are like that with me, I'm like, whoa, because my deeply intimate, lovely, beautiful relationships that are appropriate, mostly with women, are they took a long time to build, slowly, over time, gradually. And we had friends in common, and those friends respected this person, and I saw that this person was well esteemed by other people and respected and loved. And slow over time, if somebody's bum rushing you or they want you to trust them right away and you don't even know them, that's another red flag. Trust is built. It is earned over time. So anyone who's like, sort of demanding that you trust them right away and you don't know them, that is a red flag. They haven't earned your trust. It has to be earned. Boundaries, what are they? Well, boundaries are limits on what we will allow in our life, right? And there's two different types of boundaries. There's internal boundaries, which are the ones that we set for ourselves and we respect for ourselves. And there are external boundaries, and those are the ones that we set with other people. So external boundaries are about setting and communicating to others what you will or will not allow. And when you try to set external boundaries with a narcissist, you are going to find that they are likely to push on your boundaries. Why do they do this? Why do narcissists push on other people's boundaries? Why do they not just respect your boundaries when you set them? Well, because they feel very entitled. They are special. They do not need to adhere to the rules. The rules do not apply to them. And because they're pathologically self-centered, they care way more about what they want than what you want, right? And they actually perceive boundaries as almost like a personal insult or like a personal attack. Like, how dare you say no to this person? And keep in mind, if it's a covert narcissist, you're not going to see any sign of this. You're not going to see that that's how they feel. What you're going to experience is some passive aggressive behaviors later to punish you or to manipulate around your boundaries, but it's going to be very subtle and careful and thought out and planned, right? They're all about the long con, right? So, so in a narcissist's mind, a boundary is something to get around. It's something to manipulate or to crush. It's not something to be respected. And, when you set a boundary with a normal, healthy person, they are simply going to respect your boundary, right? That's how normal, healthy people do. But narcissists don't. They'll say, oh yeah, I respect your boundary. I totally get it. I totally understand that physical intimacy needs to go slow with you. And then when you see them the next time, they may be pushing the physical intimacy again. So that's just an example. But with narcissists, they're just not going to respect your boundaries because at the core, they don't actually respect you. They don't respect anyone. They have contempt for humans, right? So that's just really when you say no, they're like, how can I get around this, right? Or how can I get around this? If they're the coverts, they're how can I get around this boundary without this person in such a subtle way that this person isn't even aware that I'm violating their boundaries, right? With an overt, they're just like, how can I get around this? I'm going to violate your boundary, right? They're much more obvious. Some signs that you might have some boundary issues. If you tend to be a huge people pleaser and you're really concerned about what other people think of you, you're really concerned about people not being mad at you or not being upset with you, that, it's difficult for you to say no. If you're always saying yes and you feel overwhelmed because you're always saying yes to things, if you say yes to somebody and internally you really mean no, that's a sign of sort of porous boundaries. You might be an oversharer. That's a codependent characteristic when you first meet somebody or you're newly meeting them. If you're giving them too much information about you and you're really exposing yourself and being overly vulnerable and oversharing, that is another sign of weak boundaries. And that is something that takes practice, and just start working on it, especially with narcissists. It's so important that you do not overshare. You really don't, if you don't know if somebody's a narcissist or not, and you're early on, if you're dating them, be really careful about the information that you're giving to these people, little by little, crumb by crumb. Trust is earned slowly over time, right? Another sign that you might have weak boundaries is if you don't trust yourself. You feel like a lack of like trust in yourself, and so you're constantly checking with other people for feedback, or is this a good idea, or this is what I'm thinking, and you're checking with other people, and that's not a bad thing. I think it's actually good to have a community and mentors, and not always go with what's in your head, right? But if you absolutely never trust your own decisions and you're always needing to check with other people, that might be another sign that like you're not really trusting your own self, your own intuition, your own gut. Trust your gut. And then another sign that you might have some weak boundaries is if you had, if you were a kid and you had some trauma and your boundaries were possibly violated. You might have had physical, verbal, emotional, or psychological abuse as a child. And from that, you developed, sort of a really deep-seated abandonment wound and fear of rejection. And if you're finding that you're so terrified of rejection with people that you will say yes when you really mean no, or you'll go above and beyond to avoid rejection or avoid somebody being upset with you or to avoid abandonment, these are some signs that you need to work on creating much stronger internal and external boundaries for yourself. And, if you just got out of one of these relationships, your boundaries are probably just not good. If you just got out of a relationship with an emotional, psychological, verbal, or physical abuser, a manipulator, a toxic person, a narcissist, psychopath, sociopath, if you got out of one of these relationships, your boundaries have been eroded over time, because remember, narcissists, it's not just about setting boundaries once. You have to set them over and over again with these people. That's why it's so exhausting being in relationship with them. That's one of the many reasons, right? So they just don't respect your boundaries. So it's constant, warfare basically of setting boundaries. And your boundaries have been eroded over time. This person is manipulated, has lied, has cheated. They've done whatever they can to get around your boundaries and to not respect them. So you're probably totally depleted. And if that's the case, it is so important when you get out of these relationships to learn how to set some healthy boundaries, external, and get clear on your internal boundaries before you try to get into any sort of relationship with another person. I mean like romantic. Obviously, there's some people in your life that are going to be respecters of boundaries. They're people that are kind, and if you tell them no, they respect it. You're allowed to say no, and it feels safe. Obviously there's going to be people like that in your life, but if you're fresh out of one of these relationships or even years out of one, it's really important that you do some work around your codependent behaviors or your lack of boundaries. This is a quick boundary setting step that I'm going to go through with you real quick. There's these steps. 1, know your boundary. 2, communicate your boundary. 3, ask for them to repeat the boundary back to you. 4, state the consequence if the boundary is violated. 5, hold the boundary. 6, enforce the boundary if it is violated. I'm going to give you an example of these 6 steps with a real life scenario. Okay, know your boundary. Your boundary could be in a romantic relationship with you that we're in. You could tell somebody, I require physical and emotional monogamy. And that for me, that means that if we are married, we're committed like we are, neither one of us will have sex with other people outside of this relationship, nor will we develop emotional romantic affairs with other people outside of this relationship. Some people may even say, and if you watch pornography, I consider that infidelity. Not everyone does. I'm not saying that needs to be your boundary, but that could be a boundary, right? So that's what sexual and emotional fidelity means to you. That would be knowing your boundary. Get very clear on it, right? Very, very clear. Then communicate that to the other person. Hey, I really need to communicate some boundaries with you so we're really clear and make sure we're on the same page in terms of where we are in terms of a committed relationship. in this marriage that we're in, or this committed relationship that we're in, this is my idea of monogamy, sexual monogamy, emotional, romantic monogamy, and maybe no porn, whatever your boundary is. And communicate that very clearly to the person. Then ask them to repeat it back to you. Hey, I just want to make sure that we're totally on the same page, that we're clearly understanding each other. Can you repeat back to me what I just communicated to you? And you can do it in a kind way. It's totally fine to ask somebody to do this, and then they repeat it back to you. And if they got some of the points a little bit off, or they weren't clear, then that's your chance for clarification, right? Or if they understood what you said and they repeated it back to you, great. And then be like, and are you clear, or is this boundary, does this work for you, right? And check with them, and they're like, yeah, that's what I want too. Then at that point, you state the consequence if the boundary is violated. You can say, and if this boundary is violated, then I will exit this relationship. Or it doesn't have to be that extreme. If that's too extreme for you, you can say, okay, well, if this boundary is violated, then you need to go to individual therapy and do some work around whatever you got going on with your sex addiction or porn addiction or whatever, and then go to couples therapy. That could be a softer boundary, right? You get to decide what your boundaries are, what's going to work for you and what isn't, right? So then hold that boundary. And if the boundary is violated, then enforce the consequence. If you said you were going to exit the relationship, if you found out that person was physically, emotionally, or sexually unfaithful, then enforce the boundary. Exit the relationship. Or if it was a softer one where they needed to go to therapy and couples therapy, then enforce that boundary. And if they don't agree, and they don't do what you've asked in terms of the consequence, right? If they don't go to therapy, well, then you can't control them. You can only control you. So you have to decide, okay, well, if they won't go to therapy, then I'm going to exit the relationship. So do you see how, and that's kind of a very, strong boundary about a very delicate thing in a relationship, right? The boundary could be much softer. It could be, hey, if you raise your voice at me, or if you're verbally abusive, if you say verbal insults to me, then I am going to, I'm going to walk away. I'm going to leave the room. I'm going to leave the situation. I'm going to say I'm going to exit the conversation. So you can do that 6-step boundary setting with something that's a little bit lighter, like setting a boundary around the way somebody talks to you. So I know this is a long video and there's a lot of content in here, but this is just some stuff to start really paying attention to when you're dealing with people is, do they respect your no? Or do they go, that was a no. Let me see if I can figure out a way around it. That is not a good sign. So it's very important that we are very clear on our own internal boundaries, and that we set external boundaries about what we will and will not tolerate in relationships. Thank you so much, and I hope you're thriving, and Happy New Year. Bye-bye.